Have you ever felt like your life is full, yet something still feels misaligned, like you're running hard but not heading home? That gentle unrest in the soul is not confusion. It's a calling. It's the spirit whispering, "Come back to the center. Come back to me." Today we're going to talk about something so simple yet so transformative, what it truly means to put God first. Not just in words, but in the way we wake up, make decisions, love, trust, and even let go. You see, the Bible doesn't just invite us to believe in God, it invites us to crown Him as first in our lives. And when we do, something begins to shift. Our chaos finds calm, our priorities start to breathe again, and our lives begin to flow in the rhythm of grace. If you've ever wondered why peace feels distant, or why your faith feels tired, this may be the moment when everything begins to change. So I invite you to settle in, open your heart, and walk this path with me. And if this message resonates with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because someone you love might need this truth just as much as you do. Let's begin. Part 1. The Quiet Test. Who sits on the throne when no one is watching? If you truly want to know who holds the highest place in your heart, don't look at the words you say in worship or the verses you post online. Instead, examine the quiet moments, those spaces in the day when there are no expectations, no audience, and no applause. It is there in the hush between responsibilities and the solitude behind closed doors that the deepest truths are revealed. Who do you think of when you wake? What do you reach for when you're weary? Where does your mind drift when it is free to wander? These are not just passing habits. They are spiritual indicators, signposts that point to what or whom we have truly enthroned. Putting God first is not merely a performance. It is not a one-time declaration or a Sunday ritual. It is a daily posture of the soul. It begins not in the spotlight, but in the stillness. And in that stillness, many of us begin to see how easily other things have crept onto the throne. Not carved idols, but more subtle ones control comfort, busyness, approval. They don't shout. They whisper. And before we know it, the God we love has been crowded to the margins by the very things we claim to do for Him. But even in this quiet drift, there is grace, because God does not force His way to the center. He waits to be invited. He waits in the margins of our mornings, in the in-between spaces of our choices, in the silent longing of our hearts. And when we finally pause to listen, when we finally look past the noise, we realize that what our soul has been craving all along is not more of the world, but more of Him. The test then is not how loudly we praise, but how quietly we prioritize. Not how often we speak His name, but how instinctively we turn to Him. And perhaps the most honest measure is not in the grand moments of faith, but in the sacred ordinary, where life begins each morning, and where the heart either wanders or returns. It is there in the first breath of the day that the throne is often decided, not by force but by focus, not by routine but through relationship. And so the question becomes, when your eyes open and your heart begins to stir, whose voice do you let speak first? Because the first voice you listen to will shape the rest of your day. Part 2. First love, first voice, reordering your day around God's presence. What we reach for first in the morning reveals more than we think. In the stillness between sleep and waking, our heart declares its priorities long before our lips do. And if we are honest, many of us start our day reacting, checking our phones, scrolling through emails, chasing the noise of the world, before we've anchored our souls in the presence of God. But when love is true, it longs to be first. That's why Jesus, though burdened with the weight of His mission, often withdrew early before the world could speak, to be alone with His Father. He wasn't looking for guidance, only He was seeking communion. And it was in that quiet fellowship that His day was shaped, His strength renewed, His steps aligned. We are invited into that same rhythm, not as religious duty, but as the overflow of relationship. Reordering your day around God's presence is not about waking earlier, but waking differently. It is a posture before it becomes a pattern. It's opening your eyes and choosing not instinctively reaching for a screen, but first lifting your thoughts to the one who gave you breath. It might be a whispered prayer in bed, a scripture gently repeated while brushing your teeth, or a pause over coffee just to say, "Here I am, Lord." These small beginnings hold eternal weight. They set the tone, they train the soul, and it is there in the habit of seeking first love before completing tasks that the heart becomes recalibrated. You stop merely performing your faith and begin truly living it. You stop rushing into the day hoping for peace. Instead, you carry peace with you because you have received it first. Over time, these simple reorientations become holy ground. They are no longer interruptions to your routine, they are the routine, and everything else flows from them. When God becomes your first voice, you begin to hear Him more clearly in every other place. His whisper steadies your reactions. His truth checks your assumptions. His nearness guards your joy. And even on the days when things unravel, you won't fall apart. Because you didn't start from chaos. You started from presence. But a reordered morning is only part of the story, because what you bring into that sacred space also matters. It's not just about starting with God, it's about how you come to Him. And that leads us to something deeper, something many of us avoid without even realizing it: vulnerability. Let's explore the kind of heart that truly touches heaven. Part 3. Every decision matters, inviting God into the small things. There's a quiet myth many of us carry, often unspoken but deeply rooted, that God only concerns Himself with the major crossroads of our lives. We consult Him when choosing a career facing illness or praying over a child. But in the small, everyday decisions, we assume we're meant to handle it ourselves. And yet, when we look at the life of Jesus, we don't find a man who invited the Father only into crisis moments. We see someone so connected, so yielded, that even in the ordinary moments, the Father's presence shaped every step. His entire ministry flowed from that intimacy. The miracles, the teachings, and the way He moved among people. None of it came from occasional consultation, but from constant communion. Inviting God into the small things is not a sign of weakness. It is a mark of spiritual maturity. It means you trust Him enough to let Him into your habits, your calendar, your tone of voice, your spending, your eating, and your friendships. It means you no longer divide your life into sacred and secular, but you recognize that every moment is holy when God is present in it. A small prayer before replying to a text, a brief pause before making a purchase, a whisper of discernment before saying yes to yet another commitment. These are not insignificant gestures. They are the quiet anchors of a God-first life. James 1:5 reminds us, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and that promise is not reserved for life-changing events." Wisdom is available for daily living, and it is offered freely without hesitation. But we must slow down enough to ask. Not because God is reluctant to guide, but because our pace often drowns out His voice. If you find yourself overwhelmed, stretched thin, and constantly second-guessing, perhaps it's not because you're making wrong decisions, but because you're making them alone. When you start inviting God into the small things, you'll begin to experience His peace in surprising places. You'll recognize that His guidance isn't just for detours, it's for direction. His Spirit will begin to shape your instincts, and your heart will start to lean naturally toward His will. You won't always hear thunderous answers, but you'll notice clarity where there once was fog, confidence where there once was hesitation, joy where there was once only responsibility. And as your inner life becomes more aligned with Him in the details, your outer life will begin to reflect something unshakable. This is where surrender deepens, not through dramatic declarations, but through daily decisions. Yet as we walk this path of sacred attention, a deeper layer begins to unfold, the space where silence stretches and heaven feels distant. That too has a holy purpose, and it's where we must go next. Part 4. Trust or control, you can't do both. Deep down, many of us wrestle not with God's existence, but with His leadership. We say we trust Him, but we keep a firm grip on our preferences, our timing, and our desired outcomes. And the result is tension, spiritual exhaustion, from trying to walk by faith while dragging along the weight of control. The truth is simple, though not always easy. We cannot trust God fully while clinging to control. It's one or the other. And choosing trust is not just a spiritual ideal, it is a necessary surrender. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Not some of your heart. Not only when the logic checks out. All of this is a daily invitation to release your assumptions and choose God's wisdom even when it contradicts your expectations. Think of Abraham standing with a knife in his hand, trusting a promise he didn't fully understand. Think of Mary saying yes to an angel's impossible announcement, not knowing how it would unfold. Again and again, Scripture invites us not to seek clarity, but to have confidence in the one who sees the end from the beginning. Trust doesn't mean you stop thinking. It means you stop believing that your thoughts are higher than His. It means you surrender the illusion that control guarantees peace when in fact, it often leads to anxiety. When God is truly first, His voice carries the final word, not our fears, not our plans, not our pressure to please others. Control will always tempt you with comfort, but only trust will lead you into transformation. Control keeps God at arm's length. Trust pulls Him close. And yes, trust will stretch you. It will ask you to wait longer than you'd prefer, forgive deeper than you thought possible, and believe without seeing. But it is in that surrendered space that faith takes root. It is there that God begins to shape, not just your circumstances, but your soul. This is why surrender is never a sign of weakness. It is the birthplace of peace. The more you release, the lighter you become, and the more clearly you begin to see His hand guiding even the things you once feared to let go of. But even trust must lead to action. For faith to truly live, it must become more than mere belief. It must influence your behavior. Therefore, the next step requires us to realign our priorities, not just in theory, but in practice, especially in how we start and end each day. Part 5. Genuine sacrifice. When loving God costs you something, and in the life of faith, sacrifice is not a punishment, it is a refining process. It reveals the deepest parts of our devotion and tests our commitment. Anyone can sing about surrender when the skies are clear and the path is smooth. But true love for God is demonstrated not only by what we agree to, but also by what we are willing to lay down. Sacrifice is not just an Old Testament relic. It remains the evidence of a heart fully devoted to God. Jesus didn't just teach about love. He embodied it, showing us that real love involves bleeding, bending, and letting go. Not my will, but yours be done. He whispered in the garden, and those words still echo in the hearts of every follower who seeks to put God first. Abraham's story on Mount Moriah wasn't about losing Isaac. It was about revealing whom Abraham loved most. Often God allows a moment where your love is measured not in songs or church attendance, but in obedience that costs a little. He will ask for the job that became your identity, the relationship that pulls you away from Him, the habit that comforts you more than His presence ever could. Not to deprive you, but to deepen your faith. Not to take from you, but to transform you. Because when you release what you have clung to most, your hands are finally free to receive what only God can give. This kind of sacrifice doesn't always feel grand. Sometimes it's letting go of a grudge. Sometimes forgiving someone who never apologizes is an act of grace. Sometimes choosing prayer over scrolling through social media, giving generously, when no one is watching or saying no when everyone else says yes are acts of devotion. These are the private altars where God's fire descends, not because the act is grand, but because the heart behind it is fully surrendered. Romans 12:1 reminds us to present our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. That means our very lives, not just isolated moments, become offerings. Our reactions, ambitions, and comfort zones all become acts of worship when we dedicate them to God. And here's what's beautiful: every genuine sacrifice draws us closer to His heart. It softens our spirits, clarifies our purpose, and purifies our affections. It also prepares the ground for the kind of fruit that only heaven can produce. Because when you give God your best, not your leftovers, you realize that sacrifice is not a loss. It is the foundation of transformation. But love that costs something must also shape our rhythm. One of the clearest signs of this rhythm is in what or who we prioritize first. Because how you start each day reveals who your first love truly is. Part 6. The fruit you can't fake: peace, power, and purpose. When God takes His rightful place at the center of your life, something begins to happen that no effort, image, or self-discipline can produce. Fruit appears, not the kind you force, but the kind that naturally grows when the soil is healthy and the roots go deep. Peace, power, and purpose. These are not rewards for perfect performance. They are the natural outgrowth of a life rooted in surrender. Jesus said in John 15:5, "If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." That's not poetic suggestion, it's a spiritual fact. The presence of God in your life doesn't just make things better, it makes things alive. And when He is first, the peace that surpasses understanding begins to calm the chaos you once tried to manage on your own. Peace is one of the first things you'll notice. Not the absence of trouble, but the presence of calm within it. It's what allows you to sleep peacefully even when the storm hasn't passed, to forgive even when the wound is fresh, to walk slowly through seasons that used to trigger panic. This kind of peace can't be faked. It flows from trust, from surrendering control, and from laying your burdens where they belong. When God is first, anxiety loses its grip, and the heart begins to rest. Then comes power, not the kind that draws attention, but the kind that changes lives: quiet strength, deep endurance, a holy resilience that grows stronger in weakness. This is the same power that carried the early church through persecution, that transformed a fisherman named Peter into a bold preacher, that raised Christ from the dead and now dwells in those who put Him first. It's the power to say no when temptation whispers, the strength to keep going when your flesh says quit, the energy to rise every morning not from your own drive, but from His Spirit within. And finally, purpose, the kind that can't be found in titles, bank accounts, or applause. Purpose that comes from heaven. You begin to realize that every part of your life, your gifts, your wounds, and your ordinary days, is part of something eternal. When God is first, you stop wandering and start walking in a meaningful direction. Your days become meaningful not because they're easy, but because they're aligned with God's purpose. And that alignment leads us to something we all need, but often forget: the grace to start again. Because as powerful as it is to put God first, the truth is we don't always get it right. And that's why the final word isn't perfection, it's mercy. Part 7. When you fail, how grace restores and realigns you. No matter how sincere our hearts are or how determined our efforts, we all stumble. We drift away, we forget, and we make room for lesser things. And sometimes, without even realizing it, we've put someone or something else in the place that only God deserves. It happens in quiet compromises, in delays to obey, and in choosing comfort over conviction. But the hope of the gospel is not that we never fail, it's that we are never forsaken when we do. Grace isn't a backup plan. It's the very heartbeat of our relationship with God. And when you've wandered, Grace is what calls you home, not with shame, but with compassion. Not with a list of conditions, but with a reminder of who you truly are. Peter knew this intimately. He didn't just deny Jesus in a moment of weakness, he did it 3 times. Yet after the resurrection, Jesus didn't return with a rebuke. He met Peter with a fire, a breakfast, and a question, "Do you love me?" That is the language of restoration. It's God saying, "Let's begin again." That same grace waits for every soul who has slipped off course. It doesn't erase the failure, but it reclaims the future. It says your story doesn't end in the middle of the fall, it continues in the arms of the one who still believes in your calling. This grace doesn't lower the standard. It lifts you back up to it. It doesn't excuse sin, but it empowers change. And when you experience that kind of mercy, something shifts inside you. You stop trying to earn your way into God's favor and begin responding to His love with genuine devotion. Your motivation becomes love, not fear. Surrender, not striving. And putting God first becomes less about pressure and more about His presence, the joy of being with the one who never stopped pursuing you. When we fail, grace doesn't just patch us up and send us back out. It realigns us. It reminds us why we chose God in the first place. It calls us out of shame and into purpose. It whispers, "You're still mine. Let's walk together again." So if you're carrying regret today, if your heart feels distant or distracted, don't run from God, run to Him. He's not looking for perfection. He's looking for your return. And when you come back, not only does grace receive you, it recenters you. Because putting God first isn't a one-time decision, it's a rhythm of the soul, a daily return, a continual choice to say again and again, "God, you are my beginning." And it's in that rhythm that true life begins. As we draw this journey to a close, I want you to pause, not to rush off to the next thing, but to truly breathe in what we've uncovered together. Putting God first is not about a checklist or performance. It's about alignment, about allowing your heart to beat in rhythm with the one who created you. It's not some lofty spiritual achievement reserved for the ultra-religious. It's a gentle invitation that greets us every morning. Will you choose me today? Not just in times of crisis, not just in church, but in your quiet thoughts, in your daily choices, in the way you love, speak, forgive, and start anew. And the beauty is, even when we've messed it up, even when we've run after idols, forgotten to pray, leaned on our own understanding, grace is still here. Grace meets us in the middle of our mess and says, "Let's realign. Let's walk together again." You don't need to be perfect to put God first. You just need to be willing. Willing to slow down. Willing to recenter. Willing to lay aside distractions so your soul can remember where it truly belongs. Putting God first transforms everything else. It gives you peace in uncertainty, power in your weakness, purpose in your waiting. It doesn't guarantee a storm-free life, but it anchors you when the winds blow. And slowly over time, what once felt like sacrifice begins to feel like joy. What once seemed like obedience begins to look like freedom. You begin to see life differently, more clearly, and more confidently, because your focus is not on the chaos around you, but on God who holds everything together. So wherever you are right now, whether you feel strong in your faith or are far from it, this is your moment to realign. To say, "God, I want you at the center of my life. Not just today, but every day." And if you stumble tomorrow, simply start again. The grace that called you today will still be waiting for you tomorrow. If this message has stirred something in your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Pass it on to someone who needs a reminder of what truly matters. And if you haven't already, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us on this journey of faith as we continue to learn, grow, and put God first together. God bless you, and may your heart stay close to His.